have to be a quadriplegic and have my kid feed me through a straw for the rest of my life. You know, it wasn't necessary. And of course, then we have the drug and the behavior in itself. We have initial efficacy. Someone gave a paper, and I wish I could have seen it, about addiction works. It works. So why would you ever change? And there's a good argument to be made there. Because generally, if you find a substance that relieves your distress, it's effective. Now, not all drugs stay effective. You have the issue of tolerance, and we're going to talk about that. And sometimes with certain kinds of drugs, and pot is the biggest one in my opinion, often people who smoke pot for long periods of time, are they addicted? I don't know. But I've had the experience with people, and it actually happened to me when I smoked pot, of the drug turning on me. Like all of a sudden, instead of making me feel mellow, it's making me feel creeped out. What the hell? You know? Like, this doesn't feel very good. Of course, it made me stop, which I guess is a good thing. You know, I mean, I suppose that's, if you stop doing it, I guess that means you're not addicted. I don't know, but mostly the drug works. Mostly the internet porn works. Mostly the alcohol works, except when you're dealing with tolerance and habituation. In other words, when you need more and more of it, okay? And, well, habituation has to do with not getting the desired effect, and tolerance has to do with the build-up, the amount that you have to do. And of course, then you have the long-term physiological and psychological effects of continued use. So we've covered the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, and the drug itself. And now I want to talk about the circular and escalating nature of the addictive process. As efforts to address the situation continuously fail, the belief system of the addict and the interpersonal system surrounding the addict shape themselves to the intractable nature of the problem. I've been alluding to this throughout the presentation. But the idea is you've got this something that's intractable, and no matter what you seem to do, nothing changes it. Pretty soon, you start to change. You accommodate it, and your behavior changes, which is how my lady ended up buying 2 cases of beer and a half a gallon of rum after several years of marriage. She didn't start out doing that. That's something that she accommodated to the intractable nature of the problem. People don't start out letting dad sleep on the floor and walking around him when you're trying to get ready for school. But over a long period of time, where people don't want to confront dad because he gets angry, and I can change, so I change. Because this thing isn't changing. At the same time, habituation, tolerance, and the long-term physiological, psychological effects of continued use take their toll. As Brown points out, the world of the addict eventually becomes organized around efforts to prove they are not addicted and that they can control their substance use. So at the end stage of this process, people's lives, as mine was, think about me and my cigarettes, I was organized around the proposition that I could control my substance use, and I did. By most standards, of objective standards, 10 cigarettes a week, 8 to 10 cigarettes a week at very prescribed time is the epitome of control. So one of the ideas I like is that the personality is the co-host to both the addiction and the person trapped inside of the addiction. So once again, in my case, I was trapped. I didn't know it, but I was trapped inside my compulsion to prove I could do it. It's also a function of your relationship to the substance. So for instance, you know, most of what you hear about an addiction, most of what I've even talked about in addiction, has to do with control issues. And if you look at the first step in AA, I admit that my life became unmanageable because of alcohol. It's about control, okay? But there's a whole other theme in addiction having to do with what I call the nurturant themes. There's the control themes and the nurturant themes. And the nurturant themes are like this. I was working with 2 twin brothers whose mother had abandoned them to their father. And there were stories about this woman's compulsive, prescription-seeking behavior blah, 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 blah. I mean, she was just the most hideous person in the world. A mother who would abandon her kids and do this, that, and the other thing, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, wow, this lady must be the devil incarnate. You know? Well, I meet this lady, and she walks into my office, and she weighs 104 pounds if she weighs, you know, she doesn't weigh more than 104 pounds. She's 44 years old, and she looks like she's 70. She walks into my office, she sits down, and my first question to her was, do you have health insurance? And she said, why? I said, well, I know you're getting divorced. I'm not sure if you're still covered by your husband's health insurance. He said, well, don't worry, I'll pay you. No, I'm not worried about my fee. I'm worried about you. What do you mean? He said, well, you're clearly ill. You know, and I forget about condemning. This is a person who was sick. But because of what she had done, everybody viewed it as something else. Well, I mean, this woman, the easiest person I ever got into a rehab in my life. I mean, I should just take her by the hand and let's walk down the street and put you in a rehab. She needed taken care of. She didn't know how to do it. She had alienated everybody in her life, so they weren't going to do it. The only thing she had were these stupid pills. I mean, it was walking from here to here for her to go into a rehab. The key was no condemnation. The key was caring, compassion, nurturance. I was offering her nurturance. Because what she was after was nurturance. The other way you know it is if you ask somebody to talk about their relationship to the substance. I don't know if you heard me when I was talking about my cigarette. Me and my cigarette. It's like my pal. My pal who kept me company, you know, when I'd have to go into that appealing yet threatening environment of a lot of other competitive men. I was raised by a father who was very brutal. And so I was very attracted to men, but I was always very wary of them. And that cigarette was my kind of badge of, like, you know, this is my protector, this is my safety, this is my... It was all about that. If someone had come over and said, hey, you are my best friend, and put their arm around me and said, let's go play golf together, I would have fallen over. I wouldn't have known what to do. But that's not what guys do. What guys do is say, hey, what kind of asshole are you? What the? Get out of here. I ain't going to do that. Never mind. How many shots do you want? 5 shots? Are you crazy? You know, this is men being with each other. It's fine. But I was sufficiently anxious that I needed my cigarette at that time. Oftentimes, you know, I remember talking to a woman years ago, and at that time I thought that all spouses of alcoholics were nurses. You know, it seemed like every male alcoholic I met, there was a woman who was in the helping professions of some kind. You know, it was like, because there's this, like, you know, whatever. But this woman was herself a nurse, and she was alone, and she was talking about all the people she has to take care of and so on and so forth. And I say, so who or what takes care of you? Who or what takes care of you? Because you don't sound like you ever stop. I mean, do you ever stop? And then she starts to tell me about it. At the end of the day, she draws herself a hot bath, and she and her glass of wine, you know, have a nice little love affair, you know. And that for her, the wine, it was a source of nurturance. When I said, you know, this is getting out of control, she says, I know. She's not in denial about the lack of control. I know. So it doesn't make much sense to confront somebody with the fact that they don't have control when they're not fighting you. She says, no, I know I don't have control. But I also don't have any other way of taking care of myself. I don't have any other way to get comfort. And don't you dare take it away from me. I'll protect it like it's my cub. So here's the circular nature. And here's the third one, which I think is pretty important. Developmental arrest and the growing divide between the addict's capacity to function and the inexorable escalation of life's demands. I don't know if you've noticed, but adulthood has many more demands on you than childhood. And I have a feeling that it ain't going to get any easier. That part of the wisdom of life is that your capacity to handle things and to manage things, the challenges that you face go up through the lifespan. I am really struggling with this idea of retirement because it seems to me like extraordinarily unappealing. I don't know what I'd retire to. I mean, I enjoy the challenge. I don't want to have them, but I don't want to give them up either. If I choose to, I want to engage it. I think that we're wired as humans to constantly, challenge ourselves, which is why, one of the things that's characteristic of addicts is like we're always busy challenging ourselves in some way and getting gratification from meeting the challenge. But when you're an addict and you are developmentally delayed or arrested because you're constantly aborting the developmental process through relieving your distress, the divide between what you're capable of doing and what your life requires gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the dysfunction associated with your addiction gets greater. So if I had to predict the likelihood of what I talk about doing in psychotherapy working with someone between the ages of 45 and 55 and the ages of 15 and 25, I would say the likelihood is much greater in the older group. Much greater. Young people, it makes no sense at all that there's something that they can't control. They have had no experience with that yet. And they haven't tried. They haven't tried yet. So mostly my experience with kids is I help them to set up some criteria for how they'll know they're having a problem if they are. I will coach the family to, raise the bar and not lower the bar, raise the bar, okay? And then I will predict failure. And I will prepare the family for failure so that they don't feel betrayed, act betrayed. How could you do this? You promised blah, blah, blah. Okay? Because that just fuels the whole process. And then after a series of non-catastrophic failures, sometimes the kids are ready. And they're also, whereas older people, they've lost jobs, they've lost marriages, they've done this, they've done a bunch of stuff, they screwed up in every which way they can think of. One of my favorite stories about this issue is I worked with a guy years ago, and he was referred to me by a psychoanalyst who he'd been seeing 5 times a week. And this is back when I lived in a little row house, and people actually walked through my home to get to my office. And I could hear the alcoholic shuffle on the hardwood floors. And when I laid eyes on him and I saw that rosacea, in his face, it confirmed it. And he came in with a notebook, and it was a marble notebook filled with his dreams. And when he handed it to me, I read it. I couldn't make there was not a full sentence. There wasn't a subject, predicate, object in the whole book. It wasn't word salad, but it may as well have been. And the guy's talking to me, and we're going back and forth. And I ask him about drinking and so on, and he tells me about all this drinking he's doing. And I had one of those classic moments. I said, well, did you tell your psychiatrist about the drinking? He said, no. I said, why not? Never asked. Psychoanalysts don't ask you what you're doing. They just listen to your free associations. So after a while, we're talking. This guy had big ambitions, very big ambitions, challenges, blah, blah, blah. In those days, Gregory Bateson was talking about The pride of the alcoholic and the pride of potential, not the pride of actual achievement, which I thought was a kind of clever idea. He was a recovering alcoholic. Thought he might know something. So this guy was like that. So at the end of the session, first session, he says, well, what should I do? Now, I was just in training, and I was busy trying not to be directive. So I kind of fudged the question and kind of skated around it. Managed to get him to come back for a second session. At the end of that session, he says, what should I do? Well, I started to feel a little cornered, like I couldn't really get out of this. So I finally said to him, I said, you know what you should do? Here's what I think you should do, I said. He's looking at me. What I'd like you to do between now and next week is to figure out a way to not let things get any worse. He started to laugh with relief, like, oh, I could do that. I could do that. So he came back the next week, and he had a little bounce in his step. Things hadn't gotten any worse. So at the end of that session, he wants to know what he should do now. I said, well, let's just lock this in a little bit here. Why don't we have you just, between now and next week, see if you can figure out a way to not let things get any worse. I already did that. I said, I know, but I made an argument for why it made sense for 2 weeks in a row. It's a little harder to sell it to him the third week. But I sold it to him. I said, listen, you've been getting worse for 15 years. You've got these big, big dreams. So we got to create, a baseline here. Well, the fourth week he came in like this. Just beaten. See, because if you can't not let things get any worse, like, you can't do anything. See, so his aspirations, his goals, his dreams were all colluding. Because if I try to build a skyscraper in Manhattan and I fail, well, guess everybody but Donald Trump fails at that. So this thing about the gap, he was so far. He had fallen so far from what he had to do in life. He was an ineffective parent. He couldn't make a living. He was so far at the age of 44 years old with adolescent kids that in that session, all I had to say to him was, wouldn't it be great to get away from all this madness? And he started to cry. I said, we could put you in a rehab. We can get you off the booze. It's a start. And he started to blubber. He said, well, what about Christmas? I said, we can go after Christmas. Now, just to show you how crazy this guy was, or that addiction is, he later confessed to me that the day before he went in, which was the Monday after Christmas that year, this was like in late December, it was like maybe a week away, he got all the booze that he had in the house. And he collected it in the bathroom with the intention of pouring it all out. And he said, I sat there for 2 hours. I was paralyzed. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let myself. So he started to drink. And of course, he couldn't drink either. He couldn't do that. He was so, he was on tilt, He finally threw all the booze away, and he did get sober. That list, is a really, again, I hope you know that I didn't know what I was doing then. Okay? Because I didn't have an understanding of it. I didn't have a conceptual framework. I was just somehow intuitively flying by the seat of my pants and collecting these stories and trying to figure out what is going on here. Like this guy that I told you about with the wife who, when she said, I wish you could just have one glass of wine. This guy got sober. He never went to AA, okay? That Christmas, I got a Christmas card from the wife thanking me for my help and blah, 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 and with a postscript from the husband. And the postscript says, I haven't had a drink and I haven't gone to AA. So I guess I'm proving you wrong. And I sent him back a card. And it said, not yet. Not yet, you haven't proven me wrong. See, because I intuitively knew that if you're proving it, you know what I'm saying? There's something wrong with that. There's something not quite right with that. So I wanted to inoculate him. I want to inoculate him from relapsing by telling him, you haven't proven a thing to me yet. So you get a sense of the escalation process. Yeah, one of the things that happens a lot with families of alcoholics and drug addicts is that they don't escalate. The system so accommodates the person that they become institutionalized within the family. And they're Uncle Harry. One of my greatest fears in family life was that I would go around, and if there was a transcript of what went on in the family, there'd be an asterisk attached to everything I said. And at the bottom of the page, the asterisk would go, that's just Tom. You know, that I would be marginalized in my own family. And that's what happens. Sometimes the family organizes around Uncle Harry the drunk or whatever. So we've talked about the escalations in terms of idiosyncratic ways of perceiving reality. When the central fact of addiction goes unacknowledged. And even when it is acknowledged, the implications are often minimized. So like, one of the things you have to get around is the idea that people will acknowledge there's an addiction, but they don't accept the implications of that acknowledgement. And the intractable nature of the situation leads to progressively more destructive accommodations. So here we are to the challenge. The challenge for the therapist or counselor working with actively using addicts is to fully appreciate the fact that the life of the person you're talking to is not under their control, but is being controlled by the substance or the behavior they have become addicted to. Just like anyone who cares for an addict, the therapist is likely to collude with the addiction unless their behavior is informed by an understanding of the dynamics of addiction. What the psychotherapy of an actively using addict attempts to do is to use the interpersonal dynamics of the therapeutic relationship to affect an intrapersonal event in the life of the client. You're trying to use the dynamics of the conversation to effect an intrapersonal event, something that's supposed to happen to the person inside. And so then the goal of therapy with actively using addicts is to help the addict to fail in their own eyes without killing themselves or somebody else. See, because addicts fail. They don't need any help. They're getting into car crashes, they're losing jobs, they're losing families, they're destroying marriages. They're doing it every day. So helping the addict to fail would be, sort of an oxymoron. The critical thing is, in their eyes, someone could profitably write a book about what is hitting bottom for different people. I had a guy who had lost his marriage, lost his job. When I met him at Fairmount Institute, he was on a psychiatric unit because he thought that he came in thinking he was psychotic. He pooped in his pants. He pooped in his pants. That was hitting bottom for him. What had happened was, he was one of these guys, very handsome. He literally fashioned himself as James Bond, including, now I don't know much about hard alcohol, but apparently James Bond had his martinis a certain way. Is that right? Like stirred, not shaken, not stirred. And he had this whole thing, this suave, shaken but not stirred, blah, 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 blah. And what had happened was he drove around a convertible. He was about 55. He's driving around in a Mustang convertible. His wife has left him. And he's got this 26-year-old girlfriend, and he's going up to her walk-up apartment in Philadelphia with his shaker full of martinis. And he's climbing the walk upstairs, and he feels something kind of wet and gooey going down the back of his leg. He was so far gone that he lost control of his bowels. Now, the hitting bottom part of that was, I found out later, he was a German. His grandmother was an immigrant. They lived in Fishtown, which is a poor section of Philadelphia. And he used to have to wipe himself with newspaper. And, this fastidious German family having to wipe himself with newspaper. So one of the things I didn't know is that he had sort of a compulsion about cleanliness. And apparently he had like a closet full of toilet paper in his house. I mean, he never wanted to be without toilet paper. And so for him to soil himself was a catastrophic event. Now, to me, that's the kind of catastrophic event I'm trying to have people have. That's a good one. Let's keep them like that, and let's keep them from wrapping themselves or anybody else around a pole. Because I've also seen that. I've also worked with guys who've killed people, and their lives are ruined. They will never be the same. There's no forgiveness. It's just you can't kill a 21-year-old and be a conscious, loving human being and not have your life with a terrible black mark on it. That will never go away. So the goal of the psychotherapy is to help the addict to fail in their own eyes. It's a critical fact, without killing themselves or someone else. And the goal of the therapist is to not collude or enable the addiction. And so then we have to confront the sources of collusion. Belief in control, fear of failure and the need to succeed. See, if you're a novice therapist, you want to do good. You want to be successful. And you're basically up Schitt's Creek. Because you don't get to succeed at this. I was thinking I call pathological optimism, it's like reframing everything in some positive way. It's like, no. Arrogance, that's the one that really got me. You don't get up and talk to a group of people they never met before without being a little bit arrogant. It's not a bad thing. But the way arrogance got me was when I first started working at the outpatient drug service at Chester Crozier Hospital in 1977, when I moved from having a private practice in Massachusetts to be with my future wife, the only job I could get, no matter how I tried, I could not get a job outside of the addictions field because I had that big A on me. Remember the A? And so I went to this place, and I'm a psychologist. I got a master's degree at that time, and I have a caseload of 64 files on my desk. This is August. The last guy left the 1st of April. Nobody's been contacted since that time, and I have nobody to talk to. There is nothing more lonely than a psychotherapist with nobody to talk to. I mean, you're talking about major league lonely. So the first thing I did was I started calling these people, dialing for dollars. Will you talk to me? Please talk to me. So out of the 64, I got 3 people to show up. One was a woman who taught me a lot about suicide. Another was a guy who would be described now as a multi-diagnosed bipolar. Yeah, I do everything under the sun. Among his many entertaining qualities was he would get himself, he would go to truck stops and proposition truck drivers, and if they let him have sex with him, then he would insult them and call them faggots, and they'd kick the shit out of him. So he'd come in with a black eye or bruises. I mean, it was like he got the crime and the punishment all in one package, I mean, I'm like, what am I doing with this person? And then I got this black guy who had no teeth, who was a heroin addict, a guy who had been on heroin, and he came to see me. And after this first session, he said, well, should I come back to see you? I'm like, I'm not sure, do you think I should continue to see you? I said, well, I'm not sure. What do you want? He said, well, I thought you'd be able to tell me whether I should come back to see you. I didn't know what to tell the guy. And truthfully, I needed somebody to talk to. So I said, yeah, come back. And so he came back. And I see him, I started out every week, but it'd have to be in the evening because it was after work. And then as I got busier, I saw him every other week. And it was, I never, we were from totally different cultures. This is a guy who never got out of grade school. He was a laborer. He had a paramour and 2 children. He was younger than me. And I didn't know anything about addiction, in spite of the fact that I was considered an expert. Because once you've worked in the field, you're now an expert. So, so I don't know what I'm doing. And this guy's talking to me, and we don't have much in common. And so now he's coming every other week in the evening. Last appointment, 8 o'clock. Pretty soon I'm so busy I don't have to work the evenings. So now it's once a month. Now, I don't know for the life of me why the hell this guy's coming to talk to me. Because most sessions end with, do you think I should come back and talk to you again? So finally, since I don't understand what the hell's going on, and I don't really want to be stuck there at night once a month, I say to him, well, I'm not, what do you think? He said, well, I don't know. I'm asking you whether you think I should come back. And I said, well, listen, you've been working in a stable job. I went to list all the things he was doing right. I said, seems to me like you're fine. You're fine. So, no, I guess you don't need to come back to see me again. I remember it was a Wednesday night. Thursday morning, get into work, 8 o'clock, message from the paramour. Disappeared in the middle of the night. Went out and scored heroin. Never heard from him again. Never heard from him again. Like, what? What? What did I do? What did I do? Well, if you're fine, then you don't have a problem. If you don't have a problem, you can go out and score some heroin and get high. You see? I didn't know then not to congratulate him. I didn't know then to suggest that he had control. I didn't know then that this was something that owned him. And as far as I know, I never heard from anybody again. And I believe that if I had told him that he should return to the clinic in 6 months and pick up an appointment card, that would have told him to come back 6 months later and pick up another appointment card, and told him to, and if we had just given him appointment cards for the next 10 years, however long, he would have never gone out and used. Because he didn't use, from the time the last therapist left, the 4 months, he never used, because he was still a patient at the clinic. And if you're a patient at the clinic, it means you have a problem. If you have a problem, you can't use. So you got to learn from your mistakes, folks. I put in here lack of belief in the healing power of suffering. These are all collusions, ways that the therapist colludes. Because if you don't believe in the healing power of suffering, then it's very hard to let people suffer enough. This is a big one, overestimating the power of the relationship. And of course, there's always the need to make a living. And because I work in private practice, I thought a lot about how to deal with that. And basically what I do is, this goes to the ask of the therapist, but what I do is I make it centrally important. In terms of the therapeutic relationship, the key thing is to not let the addiction damage me. You got that? The key thing, if I'm going to work with somebody, is your addiction cannot hurt me. Because if it hurts me, I'm going to be disappointed, I'm going to be angry and frustrated. So I make the system, the client's system, insulate me from the potential harm of the addiction. And about the only way they can hurt me is to not pay me and to not show up. So people pay me up front, and they pay me if they don't come. And I make it explicitly clear that we're doing it this way for this reason. I lay it out completely. I let people know, I say, you know, your addiction, whatever you're going through has harmed your relationships. The last thing you need is for it to harm your relationship with the person you've hired to help. So we're not going to let that happen. We're not going to let whatever you're going through, and I put it that way, whatever you're going through, not you, whatever you're going through, we're not going to let that hurt me and therefore us. And you know how people experience that? As a comfort. As a comfort. Here's finally somebody who's not going to get hurt by me. Somebody I can't disappoint. Somebody I can't let down. So interpersonal distance from addiction. This is now aspects of the interpersonal distance from the addiction. Compassion for the person trapped inside the addiction. Compassion for the person trapped inside that addiction. They don't elicit compassion much. Mostly, they elicit something like disgust and repulsion. And that's partly because of people's lack of familiarity with their own vulnerability, to their own, there but for the grace of God, go I. Patience. Addiction is a lifelong and life-threatening disease. A lifespan development perspective is essential. I can tell you what, but I can't tell you when. Most addicts, if they live long enough, will hit bottom. And longitudinal studies are clear. Most alcoholics stop drinking if they live long enough. What we're trying to do is shorten the duration and lower the negative consequences. I think a familiarity with the addiction itself is a great asset of the therapist. The addiction itself is your friend because it is like that cancer that gnaws at the host. It's continuing to eat up more and more pieces of the person's personality, of their soul. Okay? I think familiarity with 12-step programs is very important, and I think the philosophy of Alcoholics Anonymous, some of the experts here notwithstanding, is very sound. I'm not wedded to it, but my experience is that people reinvent 12-step programs when they don't go to them. This guy I told you about who said, you know, I haven't drunk, I haven't gone to AA. He got all of his roofing and painting contractor buddies. They started a little club where they weren't going to drink. And this is true. And they all reinvented AA. You know, they meet, they get together, they don't, for the purpose of what? Not drinking. Because they used to all drink together, and they all got married, they all got little kids, and their wives were all pissed off. So they formed a community of sorts. Now, does it have every one of the steps? No, but the basic idea is right.
We know it.
Right.
We have it all up.
Exactly.
Most of us here have support because, I mean, we have our colleagues, we have, you know, and we've been
Right.
So we have people that we know how to talk to, we have communication skills. We've been learning all this stuff. We have a better chance at reproducing that on our own.
Right.
And, I mean, and I thought about it even just for my own self in, quitting the smoking. I did it with my partner.
Right.
We did it together. I had the support. I was working in an addiction center at the time. They had a cessation group going, getting the information.
Right.
And I applied the 12-step stuff, my own spiritual well-being.
One day at a time.
All the, I do those
Right.
principles
Right.
automatically. And, I mean, so the principles, the 12-step program, the programs that are out there, I mean, they do work and they have an effect. And I don't think that it was fair yesterday to look at this kind of population and ask that question and have it speak to something that it really isn't.
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting about the controversy about this is, to me, it's just evidence of our preoccupation with self-reliance and control. I mean, it's evidence of we need to believe that we have the control, and so people who acknowledge that they don't are somehow unseemly. And I think it's a cultural thing. I really do. I don't think that I don't think people who are beggars in India are worrying about these issues, or thinking in the same way. But we as a culture are very preoccupied with self-reliance and control, and anything that smacks of something else seems like you're demeaning the person. You're demeaning the alcoholic. I do think there are problems within the culture of AA. Absolutely. Just like there are problems within the culture of Christianity or Buddhism or anything else. There are problems within that culture. And I think that a more secularized understanding of what works will help. I'm not against spirituality at all, but I don't think we should appeal to spirituality at every turn. When I was talking earlier about the higher power being your unique requirements for living, I think that covers it. It doesn't forego a spiritual experience, but the bottom line is, you have to live in a certain way because of your unique requirements. And alcohol is one of them. If you're diabetic, if you have any other situation, if you're a woman, there are unique requirements. I don't have to go out and get Tampax once a month. I'm not feeling bad about it. I hope you're not feeling bad about it. Do you know what I mean? But it's your unique requirement for living. You do it for self-care, and you don't do it at your peril. And you have to pay attention to that.
I think it's something systemic about this self-reliance business. And part of it is that how do you get somebody to see a therapist these days?
Mm-hmm.
It's just very difficult.
Right.
I have a daughter. She needed to see a therapist. I have the money to do it, and it was still hard.
Right.
Because there's lineups. And so people think that they need to do them themselves because it's so hard to get somebody into it. My kids that I have on my program, if I want them to see a therapist, they have to be almost dead.
Right. It's a really terrible, it's a healthcare crisis, in my view, that psychological help is, the culture is so biased against it, one of the most ridiculous things is, I used to be able to call up and get somebody in rehab. Now the person who's going to rehab has to go to the managed care company and convince them they're the alcoholic and that they need to go in. Well, most alcoholics I've worked with go, well, I don't think the problem's that bad. So what's the likelihood they're going to convince somebody who has to pay the bill? You're absolutely right, and it's a huge problem, a huge, huge problem. I live insulated from it because I'm in private practice, and I charge a lot of money to do what I do. But I don't know what's going to happen to the field, because I think the field is just in big trouble when it comes to this. And it needs to be widespread. People need to come out of the closet. I'm big into the recovery movement, I'm big into it. Everybody here who's been in psychotherapy and thinks it's helped them should be out lobbying. But we're victims of the cultures just as much as anybody. We're going to go scurry into our little private place and say, I don't want to expose myself to that shame or criticism or question. People ask me all the time, like, what's it like to be talking to all those wackos? Well, I play golf and I hang out with a lot of, nutty guys. That's what I do. I don't just hang out with people like you. I also do this other stuff. And there's bias within the culture. What do you think it's all those wackos? And I say, you know what? They're the finest people I've ever met. And I mean it. And people go, they are? I said, yeah, you have no idea how interesting the conversations are. It would blow you away.
There's another comment I have about it is AA and Narcotics Anonymous. One of the things I've had trouble with over the years is that there's no continuance in it. Like the people change so fast, you can't really keep track of it. And sending 18 and 19-year-olds there, I'm not confident of what they're going to find when they get there.
Right.
And being a Catholic, I see the same thing in the parish.
Right.
I've been to a lot of parishes, and some of them are quite a lot different than another, and there's not enough.
Well, it's a strength and it's a weakness at the same time. It's a strength and a weakness because the anonymity is really a wonderful aspect of it. But for kids who need a community, I mean, many parents I've had tell me horror stories about sending their kids to NA meetings and stuff. Huh?
That's my experience with it, that you can't count on it.
Right.
And that's, this is their philosophy. You can't count. That's actually what the person's going to meet when they get there.
Mm-hmm.
Too many times I've got the impression that there's people that go to those meetings to find people to drink with or new people to drink with. And you can't count on it. There's no control aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think that there needs to be more access to other things.
In our area, there's been a lot of, there's some people who have figured out that if you do groups, insurance companies will pay for it. So it's like there's a little window there of doing group-oriented therapies, and kids do well in groups. So, we have a lot of like day treatment kind of stuff and group therapy for adolescents.
We used to have that, but it's been basically cut in those territories.
Yeah, I mean, the economics of healthcare have to come around a little bit because there are effective therapies that are less expensive. I mean, I know that my patients get reimbursed more for group, percentage-wise. I charge $45 for a group session, and many of them get $40 back. Whereas if for an individual session, I charge, close to $200, and nobody gets more than, I mean, the very best insurance pays 80%, but mostly they get 40 or 50 bucks. Because if you think about it and this is a whole other conversation, if you think about it from a healthcare policy and the economics of healthcare point of view, there is a bias, there will be a bias on the providers, on the insurance side, to support the less expensive treatments. And there are some very effective less expensive treatments, they're just hard to administer. I can tell you doing group therapy in private practice is a lot more work than doing individual therapy.
Our problem is more there's not insurance that deals with this, it's government.
Mm-hmm.
Government
Yeah. I know we're getting close to the end here, folks. Did you have to, this one's already leaving. We got a phone call. And I would be happy to go on indefinitely and just keep working with you guys because it's a lot of fun. I hope that the outline, as you read it through after we've finished, is somewhat self-explanatory. I'm in the process of continuing to work on, I started writing about this back in the 1980s, the late 1980s, and I sort of put it down to raise my kids and for a lot of personal reasons, and now I'm sort of exhuming it and continuing to do it. And I'd be happy if anybody wanted to give me their email address to send you the first several chapters of a book, I think it's about 60 or 70, I don't know how many pages now, that may never become a book. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing where I've been doing it for so long now, I don't know if it'll ever come out as a book. I'm sort of more inclined to write stories now, like tell good stories. And it wouldn't be fair of me to end without the story that got me deciding I didn't want to give up treating addiction. And that was a kid that I saw. I had worked at this place and I had figured out a way to never see any alcoholics or drug addicts. So even though I couldn't get a job in the mental health field, I had succeeded in not seeing any. And the way I did that was putting myself on call to the emergency room and taking all the toxic psychosis cases, all the kids who were doing angel dust. Because they were psychotic and freaked out, and I understood psychosis, and I could work with them. So this one kid and I had long hair at the time, and I used to wear a serape, and I wore sandals, who thought I was Jesus, insisted that the only person who could help his friend was me. And he begged me to see his friend. And I knew from the description this kid was an alcoholic. And I did everything I could to not see the kid, and the guy kept asking me, please, would you just, I'll tell you what, I won't set up an appointment, but I'll meet him during my lunch hour. So send him over here during my lunch hour. So I'm sitting in my office, and this guy shows up. And I'm sitting there eating my yogurt and my peanuts. Throughout my life, I've always had ritual lunches. And at that time, it was yogurt with the fruit in the bottom and a bag of roasted peanuts that I would break the shells and I'd eat. And it was just this lovely little ritual. And the guy shows up. And so I look at him, I say, how you doing? He says, I'm all right. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, Frank told me to come talk to you. I said, oh, yeah, about what? He said, well, I guess I want to stop drinking. I said, what? He says, I'm in this attitude of like, this guy's going to get out of here. I'm not going to give him 15 minutes. He's going to walk out of here. So I say to him, he says, I want to stop drinking. I said, what? I said, you want to stop drinking? He said, yeah. I said, well, why are you talking to me? He goes, well, isn't that what's I'm supposed to talk to you, right? I said, I don't know. I said, are you sure it's you that wants to stop drinking? Are you sure it's not your girlfriend? Frank said, your girlfriend wanted to stop. He goes, yeah, well, actually, yeah, my girlfriend does want me to stop. So I say to him, nothing personal, but do you have sex with your girlfriend? And he goes, well, yeah, I have sex with my girlfriend. I said, so you have sex with your girlfriend, and she wants you to stop drinking, and you haven't stopped drinking? He goes, yeah. All right. Anybody else want you to stop drinking? He says, well, yeah, my mother. I said, your mother wants you to stop drinking? He says, yeah. I said, let me guess, she beat you or something. She was a horrible mother, right? He goes, no, she was a wonderful mother. I said, you happen to know whether it was natural childbirth? She said, I think, yeah, it was. I said, so your mother went through labor pain. Did she breastfeed you by any chance? I'm trying to, give it to this guy. He goes, yeah, she did breastfeed me, I think. I'm not sure, but I think she did. I said, so let me get this right. Like your mother, who went through labor to deliver you to the world, has loved you all your life and breastfed you, wants you to stop drinking, and you haven't started. And your girlfriend has sex with you, and what? Anybody else? He says, yeah, my dad. I said, what was he, a brute of some kind? Brutal? No, he's good. All right, so let me get it. Your dad, who loved you, wants you to stop drinking, and you haven't stopped drinking. And your mother, who went through labor to deliver you to the world and breastfed you and took care of you all your life, wants you, and you haven't stopped, and your girlfriend who has sex with you wants you to stop drinking, you haven't stopped drinking. What makes you think talking to me is going to help you stop drinking? And at that moment, he stopped, he looked at me, and he said, I see what you mean. I'm like, you do? Like, what is it that I mean? What did I do right? I was like, I see what you mean. And at the end, he says, well, should I come back and talk to you again? I said, I have no idea. I said, if you want, go ahead, So he leaves. Don't you know? He hasn't had a drink in the whole week. You know what I said? Must be a fluke. I have no way of explaining that. Must be a fluke. I was like, I knew I wasn't going to say great. I knew I wasn't going to say something supportive. I knew I wasn't going to do all the things I had been trained to do in psychotherapy training. So I just said it must be a fluke. And this guy continued to not drink for a while, and the warmth started to grow between us. And then I intuitively sensed that this was really important to him that he wasn't drinking, and that if he drank, he would be so ashamed I'd never see him again. So I said to him, I have no idea why you're not drinking. But I'm afraid that if you ever drink, you'll feel so bad that you won't be able to come in and talk to me about it because you're afraid I'll be disappointed. So I said to him, whatever you do, I don't know why you're not drinking, but if you do, please come back and talk to me. And he did drink. And he did come back and talk to me. And he did hit bottom. See, because first is the control, demonstrating control, okay? And then there's the failure. You see? When you're on the control part of it, proven control like I did for all those years, 19 years of proven control over cigarettes, okay? It was only when I failed did I fully accept that I couldn't smoke anymore. So you have to have that experience. Control is an illusion. We all figure that out sooner or later. I will end with this poem, since you all love poems so much. This one you don't have a copy of. It's called Last Night. Last night, as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that a spring was breaking out in my heart. I said, along which secret aqueduct, O water, are you coming to me, water of a new life that I have never drunk? Last night, as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that I had a beehive here inside my heart. And the golden bees were making white combs and sweet honey from my old failures. Last night, as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that a fiery sun was giving light inside my heart. It was fiery because I felt warmth as from a hearth, and sun because it gave light and brought tears to my eyes. Last night, as I slept, I dreamt, marvelous error, that it was God I had here inside my heart. That's Antonio Mercado, translated by Robert Bly. Thank you very much for coming.